sharing my screen and we'll just get things going. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen and everyone can hear me, and welcome to the Qdabra qRules training. We'll be going through a variety of qRules commands and features over the next few days, and hopefully we'll have some fun and we'll all get to learn a few things. I just want to go through the agenda. I know I emailed that out, but we might as well review it real quickly. So today we're going to do a little bit of introduction stuff, make sure that we've got connectivity to the site, maybe do some troubleshooting if we have any problems with that. Catherine, you emailed and said you were having a little issue, so we'll see if we can find a way around that. We'll do a little bit of a Q&A. I wanted to make sure we reserved some time to discuss any specific questions or problems you were having, or maybe problems you were trying to solve. We'll talk a little bit this morning about Office 365 and qRules. And then at 8:30 this morning, James Rishi is going to come on and he is going to go through some of the full trust commands in qRules, including some new ones for version 7.2. The second day, tomorrow, we'll have Amel and Don Stephen. They will be presenting on some of the InfoPath and SharePoint commands using submit to SharePoint list and refreshing from SharePoint list and some other SharePoint integration. Those are pretty popular features that get used a lot, and so it seems like good things to review. And then on Thursday, Rima and Karu will be presenting on input parameters in forms using get input parameters and some date manipulation and other features in qRules. Friday, we'll have Patrick presenting on future-proofing your forms. He will be going through some of the features of Forms Viewer and talk about converting a form to using Forms Viewer as well as working with external users. So hopefully there's going to be something for everyone here. This is, I think, mostly new material. I don't think we're reusing much, so if you've attended training before or watched these training videos in the past, I'm hopeful that this will be all new information, or at least, you know, not too much of a form. So I sent everybody information on logins for the training site. Can you confirm in chat whether you were able to access the training site? I know, Catherine, you said you were having an issue. You're getting that the page cannot be displayed. Vishal, were you able to access the training site? I just unmuted you, Vishal. Were you able to access the training site?
Just confirming in a minute.
Okay. And Catherine, how about you? Were you able, or were you still getting this page cannot be displayed? Okay, I see the chat now. I wasn't doing a very good job of scrolling, so I'm going to go ahead and we'll hang on another minute and see if Vishal's able to access. Yeah, Catherine, I'm not sure whether this is going to be something on your side or not, and we can do some further investigation. I don't think that I know we're not using it this morning. Forward to the credentials. Oh yeah, Vishal, just use Vika's credentials. It's what is it? I'll type it into chat here. And so that's the username, and I think the password was, so yeah, let's just make sure you can access. I don't think, I know I'm not using it this morning. You guys are mostly just going to end up having to listen to me, and I'll do a little demo because there's a few things I want to show you. Just because I think one of the things that is hard to pick up just from the documentation and from using qRules that is important is the general architecture, the general concept of how it works. And I know for me, at least, when I understand how something works, when I get that baseline functionality, it opens up a lot more avenues for me in terms of being able to troubleshoot, kind of self-support, and solve my own issues. And so I like to review that stuff at the beginning of qRules training to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page. Okay, so it looks like you were able to access Vishal, and we're going to then, Catherine, I'm sorry, we're going to assume your problem is on your side. But if your tech guy isn't able to help you get access, just drop me an email later today, and I can ping Jim Cantwell, who seems to know everything, at least every time I have a question he does, and ask him if he has any ideas for what might work for getting you logged in. Again, I'm not using that site this morning. I don't think Jimmy is, so I think we've got a little time before we start working on some stuff that's leveraging the SharePoint. So today with me, what I'm going to go through is a little bit of an intro on how qRules works. We're going to do a little Q&A, like I said, and we're going to talk briefly about Office 365. You guys want to just pop up in chat and let me know, are either of you using Office 365? Okay. Office 365 here? Okay, Catherine, that's good to know. And browser forms? You guys using browser forms or filler forms? Especially you, Catherine. I'm curious about you because of the Office 365 browser. Okay, all right. And using both. Okay, that's good to know. Just wanted to get kind of a baseline of what people were doing. So this is, I want to make sure that you're aware that you are a lot better at solving problems than you probably think you are. This is just kind of an innate human capacity. We all come with this equipment. We all have these awesome big brains and the ability to figure things out. And so when you're trying something new or learning something new, don't let yourself get discouraged. Don't think, oh, I can't do this, because the fact is you can do this. It's just a matter of figuring out the right way to do it for your head, for your brain. For me, it's a matter of breaking things down into small steps, testing changes as I go, and in fact, keeping track of what I've already tried. I find that for me, for problem solving, like when I'm trying to figure out a complex XPath for something, if I keep track of what I've already tried and what worked or didn't work, then I've got something I can build on. So I just want to remind you up front that none of this is beyond your capabilities. You can certainly do any of the things we're presenting here today, as well as come up with amazing things that we've never even thought of. Okay. So we know everybody's gotten an email with a training site URL and username and password. We know where we're at as far as accessing the training site. Hopefully you guys both have InfoPath installed. If you do not have qRules installed, I have a trial version up on the training site that you can download as soon as you can access that. So there's that little bit, but yeah, as soon as you can access that, then you'll be able to download it. But if you don't have qRules, you need qRules, let me know. I'll make sure you've got a copy, okay? The value proposition for qRules is simply that it allows us to fill some gaps that InfoPath doesn't fill out of the box. I mean, if you hang out on the InfoPath Dev Forum, or if you've worked much with InfoPath, there's some things that just feel like they're missing and have kind of felt like they were missing from the get-go. It's like, well, why can't I insert into a repeating group with a rule? Why can't I insert a repeating field with a rule? Why can't I delete something, a node with a rule? But it's just not there. And qRules was created to start filling those gaps. And what we wanted to do was provide a code library that could be activated via rules. So you were just creating rules like you do in a normal InfoPath form, and yet you had more power. Now all of a sudden you've got these features and this functionality that wasn't already there. We use qRules internally when we're building things for our own team, when we're building things for other clients, we use qRules. That means that we're constantly adding things to qRules because we're like, oh, wait, I need to do this, and InfoPath doesn't do that. Does qRules do that? No, it doesn't. Okay, we need to add this new feature. So a lot of the growth of qRules has been organic. You can combine qRules with custom code. So if you are a programmer and you're writing code already for your forms, using qRules with your custom code allows you to have a library of functions that you don't have to write yourself. And so, you've got your custom code to cover the gaps that maybe qRules doesn't cover, or the things that are so extremely customized to your environment or your form that they require custom code. And then everything else in your form, you can just use qRules for. In fact, I recently was helping a client with a form that they had developed, and not only had they used qRules with custom code, but they actually had in their custom code a couple places where they were setting the qRules command field. So they weren't even leveraging rules to set the command field, but they were doing that within the code because they had some logic that had to process before this command executed. But it was just saving them the complication and time of having to develop things from scratch. So yeah, and people are still actively building new InfoPath solutions. We all know it's deprecated. We know InfoPath has not been included with Office 2016, nor shall it be included with Office anymore, ever, apparently. But people are still building new things with it, and which surprises me. But it's a great tool because it allows us to kind of quickly develop things on the fly, and then it stores our data uncoupled from our view, which gives us more flexibility. So installing qRules, you guys have it installed, you know how to install it, just in case somebody else in your team needs to install it and they don't know this. Now you have some information here that will help you help them. The reason we run setup.exe as an admin to install qRules is because there is a single component. Okay, I see Christopher's arrived. Hey, Christopher, we've kind of already gotten started. Chat if you do not have, or if you do or do not have access to the training site. So when you have an opportunity, try signing into the training site and let me know if you have any problems accessing. So at any rate, we run setup.exe as an admin because there's a component that we use in the injector to extract your form files that has a 32-bit version and a 64-bit version. So in the qRules setup project, we have this component packed up in a way that it needs to be extracted the very first time you use the injector. And running setup.exe as admin means that the very first time you use the injector, this little component can unpack itself in the program files because that requires some special permissions. So if you try the injector and you get an error, it probably means that it wasn't installed as admin or something went wrong with that. You can go into your program files, go find the injector, right-click it, and run it as admin just one time. And as long as you've run it as admin one time, you should be fine. Okay. You inject your form template, you make sure your form template's closed first, and then you run the injector. Please keep in mind that qRules is code. Over the years with qRules, one thing I feel we have not always been clear enough about is when you inject a form with qRules, you are adding code to your form. And as such, that form requires the same handling as any form with custom code. That means if you're using the browser, your form needs to be admin approved, or it has to go in the sandbox in SharePoint, which means that the person publishing the form, if you're going to sandbox, has to be a site collection admin. It also means that the sandbox needs to be enabled. So those are a couple of things to just kind of keep in mind. The Qdabra rules data source is one of the things added when we inject a form, and it has the command node in it. There is, in the qRules code, a changed event on that command node. So every single time the command node changes, we try to do whatever it is you've entered. We take the string you've entered, and the code tries to execute something based on that string. Then it clears out the command node. So if at any point in time you're testing a form and you preview it and you enter something in the command node, drag that onto your form canvas, and you enter something in the command node and you tab out and you don't end up with a blank command node, that probably means that somehow you've disabled qRules in your form. This is a common, easy thing to do. It's very easy in InfoPath if your environment is configured correctly, like your workstation is set up so that you can add code to a form. It is a common, easy thing to accidentally add code to a form. If you do that, you'll disable qRules, and at that point you need to go under the programming category in form options and remove code, and then you need to save your form and re-inject it with qRules again. You can also modify the manifest file to get qRules re-enabled, but it's just so much easier to remove code and re-inject. So in the Qdabra rules data source, the success node can help you troubleshoot, because we mark success to true when the command succeeds. Errors are returned to the errors node. We added, I don't remember what version, I think it was 4.3 or maybe it was 5.1. We added an execution history group to the Qdabra rules data source. That's extremely helpful for a given session, because it will record every command executed, the results, the errors, the success. We a lot of times put a debug view in a form, and we throw a mystery invisible button on the form, take it out of the tab order, and so we know, oh, you can go click here in the form and it'll take you to this debug view. It's very helpful for debugging to have that execution history someplace you can see it. But keep in mind that that execution history is only active for the given session. So it's a secondary data source, which means every time you open the form, that data source is only going to have the values that it has at the moment the form is opened, which means the execution history is going to be blank every time you start a new form, right? And so if you need to debug a form and you can reproduce the steps the user took in a new form and look at the debug view and look at your execution history, you can probably find out what's going wrong. But do keep in mind that that's session-based. If you have a tricky bug that's hard to find, every now and again I'll add a field to the main data source, or two fields to the main data source, and write every command and every error back to the main data source field, so I can go look at the form after the user's done and review what's happened. So you just would add a rule to the command node that if it's not blank, go set this field to concatenate itself plus the latest command value. And the same with the error field, so you can keep a running history in a given form. Again, it's rare that you need to do that, but if you're debugging something tricky, it might be the best way to go, because if you don't know what's been happening in the form, how do you know what's causing the bug, right? So those are just a few things you can try. Let me get to my next slide here. Okay, so obviously the command field can be set with rules on other fields, rules on buttons. We discourage use of setting the command field from form load rules. The Qdabra rules data source has an attribute called finished loading. That gets set to true when the code is completely instantiated. And the reason we added that attribute is because rules run before code in info path. So think about that for a second. If we have a rule on form load that is setting the command field to execute what's basically a code function, there's a chance that the code hasn't fully loaded. If you use that same rule on the finished loading attribute instead, with the condition that finished loading is equal to true, then you know for sure the Qdabra rules code has fully loaded before executing a command. So just, keep that in mind. If you're using qRules commands when your form opens, it's best to put them on the finished loading node with the condition that finished loading is equal to true. Instead of using form load. I have also, upon occasion, seen issues when qRules commands are used in submit rules. So you know how in your submit options you can submit via rules, and then you've got a set of submit rules. I've occasionally seen issues there. So in general, I would say just use a regular button on your form, label it submit, use regular rules, and if you're going to be using qRules commands instead of using them on submit rules. Some commands return information to the results node. After version 4.2, so in version 4.3, we added two universal parameters that can be applied to any command where you can specify data source nodes, secondary or main data source nodes for the result. So let's say you're running generate GUID, which gets used a lot because a lot of times we need a unique identifier. You can specify the node you want that GUID returned to. It just simplifies things. It cuts down on the amount of rules you have. So instead of running a rule and then setting a field to the value of the result, you can just return the data directly to the field you need. If you need to pass in form values or use some special logic, you use a concat formula to set the command field's value. I'm sure you guys know that one. Otherwise, you can just type in the value box for the rules. So like generate GUID, you may not need to use a formula, but you can use a formula. For browser forms, any field or button that executes a qRules command, postback should be set to always. And that's just because the code is going to be running on the server and you need that code to run in order to get back a result. One of the ways I've noticed that I have not set postback correctly is if it appears nothing is happening in my form and I click, and this is in the browser, of course, and I click close, the close button up in the ribbon, and it'll, it pops up, well, your values have changed, you want to save this, and I say cancel, then the form will refresh because it will have posted back and all of my logic will run. So, just be sure to set post back to always in your browser forms and save yourself a little hassle there. So in general, for getting started, I think of qRules commands as Legos myself. They're just these little modules, little components. In general, I would think we've tried to keep things simple enough so that each command does kind of a discrete thing, and then you can assemble them as you need them, rather than have one command that does a whole bunch of things where you're like, oh man, I wish this didn't also do that. So feel free to stack those babies up and build whatever you need to. Checking the error node after you run each command allows you to add pretty sophisticated error handling to your form, so you can decide how much of the error you wish to expose to your users. You can decide what error information you wish to expose to your users in order to help them make a good decision going forward. You might want, for example, to stop entirely if something fails, or you might want to just let users know, hey, this failed for some reason, here's the error message, let someone know, but you let them progress. It gives you a great deal of configurability. I know the command overview is daunting. every time I've had to go through and do revisions on it, I've been like, oh my goodness, what are we doing here? You know, because it's daunting, and every time we release a new version, there's more stuff added. But, you know, browse through the index. It's got the navigation pane that you can look at, where we've kind of tried to separate things in a way that we think makes sense. And if you browse through it, it'll give you an idea of the types of things available to you, so that when you do have a new problem to solve, you have kind of a gist of what might be there. Maybe you don't know exactly how it all works, but you have an idea of what might be there. So yeah, I encourage you to look through that. So obviously qRules injects a code DLL, an XML file, and a schema for that XML file into your template. There's some options in the injector that will then inject a few more things, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. I'm gonna do a little demo just so we can talk about these files. qRules overwrites your existing template. So if you're thinking, I might want to use qRules, I might not, or I've got this one template that's really valuable to me and very special and precious, you know, back it up before you go and inject it. Although you can remove qRules from a template, you can refer to the user guide for information, or you know, you guys have my email address. Drop me a line and send me your template, and I'll take it out for you. One thing to keep in mind when you're removing qRules is when you remove that data connection, the Qdabra rules data connection, you really want to make sure you have removed all of the rules first. And I can show you here in a few minutes a good way to kind of find all those rules. And there's always just picking through the template. I find the rule inspector doesn't always show me everything, so we'll save a form as source files and take a look at ways we can find and remove rules. So I'm going to do a couple of quick demos. I want to show you, you probably have used Forms Installer, but I want to show it to you and talk about that briefly. It comes with qRules when you install it. And I want to do a little injection demo and talk about what all gets injected, just because, I mean, the more you know, right? So I think I will see if I can figure out how PowerPoint works. I have my usual challenges here, and pop over to a couple of demos. I think I also want to take a look here, and let's go take a look at Form Injector first, or Form Installer first. This is a little thing that we provide with qRules. In these days, it's in this installable forms file. So Form Installer EXE is a little application that you can use to install full trust forms. And we have a guide here for, you know, how to install your full trust forms. This form is full trust and needs to be installed. This form, I think we've also got qRules form set to full trust and can be installed. And you can also, though, reuse this application. So if you have full trust forms in your organization that you need to provide to people with a methodology for installing them, feel free to send them Form Installer with the form. You can just send them, you know, the form and Form Installer and explain to them, look, all you have to do is drag the form, you know, on top of Form Installer. Make sure info path is closed first, and then we should get a pop-up here. Escape here. Oh, here we go. So we get a pop-up that asks if we want to install. Now, here it's counterintuitive for me. It may not be counterintuitive for you. You might just be fine with this. But if you want to uninstall, you click no on this window. And for some reason, that one always stumps me. So you can uninstall by clicking no here, and it will ask you, do you want to uninstall this template instead? And you can say yes or no. I'm going to say no, and I guess it won't do anything. To install, we just say yes, we want to install it. Heads up, make sure info path is closed before you run this. Otherwise, you can end up with info path kind of hung, which you don't want to have happen. if you get an error when you try to use this, usually I go to the task manager and just make sure all InfoPath processes are gone. So we'll just say yes, and it gets installed. So now when you open up InfoPath and go into your installed forms, here's the one I just installed, the qRules form. So you can see that it did install it. And again, I think my real point here is, that's helpful, right? I think my real point is, no, my point is that you can reuse this. So feel free, if you have a full trust template that you need in your organization, to just take this and send it out with instructions for your users on how to use it. And the other point was how to remove using it, because that one is always perplexing for me. So let's look at what gets installed, injected into a form when we inject it. I use 7-Zip. It's a little free program, and I use that to extract form files all the time. If you don't have something like that, you can always rename the extension to .cab, C-A-B, and then you can extract the files. But just 7-Zip is a one-click. I don't have to make a copy of it or rename the extension or anything else. So this is just a really simple form, and you can see it's got your basic files that a simple form is going to have. Manifest XSF, the schema, sample data template, and the view. So this is what our form has, which is virtually nothing. And here is, I hope this is not the trial. I've got 2 of these installed, so hopefully this is not the trial version. It's not. Okay, so here's my qRules injector. You'll see the version number down here is a little ahead because I develop on it, so sometimes I end up with weird things installed in my machine, quite frankly. But you can always tell your version by looking down here in terms of what version your injector is. So I'm just going to drag and drop this. Now, here's our options. You can see that the injector kind of figured out that this is a 2010, and it defaults to browser and sandbox. Unless I am using one of the rich client only commands, of which there are some, but unless I'm using one of those, I usually leave this at browser and sandbox. I don't usually inject with rich client unless I for sure need one of those commands. So even if this is a filler form, I usually just use browser and sandbox, just because the code is simpler, there's a little less code, the DLL is a little smaller. I'm not using any of the stuff that writes to the file system. This isn't going to be a full trust form. I may change my mind and publish it up to the browser. You know, this is just my normal is browser and sandbox. Include term set APIs. If you're going to be doing something with term sets in SharePoint, click this. But you probably aren't going to be doing anything with term sets in SharePoint, so you probably don't want to click this. Admin deploy, this is confusing as all get out. I run across a lot of times users who feel like they have to use the admin deploy selection if their form is going to be admin deployed. And I can understand why you would think that, because it seems right. I'm going to admin deploy this form for whatever reason instead of sandboxing it, so I need to use the admin deploy option. But the fact is, this admin deploy option is for a handful of commands that require elevated permissions. And unless you know you are using one of those, just stick with browser and sandbox, even if you're going to be admin deploying your form for other reasons. There's a command called, whoops, let me pop back to where I was. There's a command called submit as user. Submit as user submits to SharePoint as a specific user. It requires admin deploy. There's query data, which requires admin deploy if you're using a specific parameter called SSAppID. That parameter uses a secure store app ID to run the query. Submit to SharePoint list has an SSAppID parameter. So again, if you're using that, you may want to use admin deploy. But otherwise, you aren't going to need admin deploy in general. Okay, so I'm going to hit inject, and then we're going to see what gets added to our form. So we're going to say, okay, it was injected successfully. So here's what I've got. Now, I can see, looking at this DLL, what version I've injected. We changed that again. I don't remember when. It was somewhere in the 5s when we modified this, because we were finding that we didn't always know what people had injected in their form. And if we go pop over here into the DLLs. So here's the different DLLs and their names. So when we look at your form template, you send it to us and you're saying, oh, I've got a problem with this. One of the first things we do usually is we extract it and we see what DLL you've got installed in your template. And you can see that too. It injects the Qdabra rules XML. So let's take a quick look at this. This is another free tool I use a lot, Notepad++. I really encourage you, if you're working with XML much, to download this and make sure you're running the XML tools plugin. So if you're wondering what version of qRules you have injected in a form, one place to see that is in the Qdabra rules XML. You can drag the data source onto your template and preview it, or you can just look at the XML itself and you can see there's the version right there. I'll go ahead and pop that down. And then the XSD, we inject that as well. And so in general, these are the 3 files you see added to your form when you inject qRules. Now, the other thing I had mentioned was how do I know what qRules commands I've got in my form? And like I've said, the rule inspector, gosh, sometimes it's a little flaky for me. Maybe it's not for you. But sometimes I run into these issues where the rule inspector doesn't show me everything. So here's a copy of our timesheet, and I'm going to go ahead and extract these files. And I just want to show you what I do when I need to know where in heaven's name we're using qRules. So I open manifest.xsf because it has the rules in it. And I do, and here's another reason that I use Notepad++ instead of like a regular text editor. It's not just the beautiful syntax highlighting, but I have found that regular old Notepad does an abysmal job for search. You know, it really is, it's brutally bad. Okay, so here I've searched for command and I can see all of the rules, right, starting about here, where I'm setting the command failed. And so that gives me, you know, anything that's got this assignment action, this is a rule, you know. I pop to it and, oh, look here, isn't that helpful? Rule set 170. So then you need to find that, right? So you find rule set 170, you can see what control it's on. Right, so then you have to find the button. This is a really good reason to give your buttons good names, right? If this said button insert Monday or something like that, my job now would be very, very easy. Regardless, this is how you can go and find these different qRules commands if you are going to remove qRules from a form, or if you need to review the logic in a form and find out where qRules is being used. Personally, this I find to be the easiest way to deal with an unfamiliar form in terms of finding things, knowing what's being used. So when you guys send a form to me and say, this is not working for me, this is another one of those things that I do really quickly is I save your form as source files and I just go and look and see what commands are being used. Okay, so that is that as far as the demo goes. I wanted to make sure we had a few minutes for any specific qRules issues any of you are having. So this is kind of a speak now or forever hold your peace moment, but does anybody have something in particular they're working on using qRules right now that they have a question about? And feel free to chat or unmute and let me know if you've got a question. And if not, that's okay. You know, this is, again, you guys have my email address. You know where the InfoPath Dev forum is. You know we're pretty responsive to qRules questions there. I just wanted to make sure we had a chance if somebody had anything in specific. So, Heather, you said your IT team is worried about using anything but browser forms. I'm guessing that is because of the deprecation of filler. And you had mentioned already that you're using Office 365. So with Office 365, you've always got the latest version of Office available to you. You download it, you get it installed, and boom, you no longer have InfoPath on your machine. So I'm going to go ahead and just move on to the next slide, because this is one of the things I wanted to talk about. Michelle says you're implementing qRules in a form where data gets submitted to SharePoint. And that's a pretty common scenario. I'm assuming you're using submit to SharePoint list, where you mean the data is getting submitted to a SharePoint list. Although qRules can also submit XML to a different SharePoint library if you ever need that functionality. So with Office 365, obviously there's some challenges there. If you are not, Catherine, if you're not already seeing problems with your qRules browser forms in Office 365, I frankly won't be surprised if you start to see them. The sandbox, as you guys have probably read, the SharePoint sandbox is being deprecated. Okay, so while SharePoint 2016 is still including browser form capabilities, in Office 365, what we were told by an Office 365 support team member was that sandbox stuff has been moved off of the web front ends, and that's one of the reasons why response time is getting slower. We've seen qRules forms become very slow to load. We've seen a lot more errors occurring in terms of, the little pop-up box with the, an error occurred, the custom code could not be run, here's the correlation ID, which when we're dealing with Office 365 is of no use to us, right? There's nothing we can do with that correlation ID. This same support resource had said that resources for sandbox forms can't be increased on Office 365, so especially if you're doing something resource intensive, let's just say you're submitting to 3 SharePoint lists and then you're saving your attachments off to a SharePoint library all on the same button click, there's a good chance you're going to start seeing failures. And in Office 365, the only option for browser forms is with code or qRules is sandbox. There's no admin deploy option. So this does kind of leave you in a difficult situation. We have been encouraging people to go to Filler if they're using Office 365. There's a download for InfoPath 2013 that's available if you have certain subscriptions. There's so you can get InfoPath 23 installed, 2013 installed, and then that will allow you to have your users use Filler. Then you need to change the library to use the client. Now, this has been something that I've recently worked with one of our clients to move to. They've moved to using Filler. It's not their favorite. They would prefer to use browser. Once they got everybody set up, they were able to get a great deal more stability. Things just became a lot more stable. So if you can move to Filler, I would recommend at this point moving to Filler. I understand the concerns with that, but at the same point in time, I don't think that Sandbox is going to get more stable over time in Office 365. I think since they're moving away from it, it's going to get less stable, quite frankly. So I'm sorry, I know that's not happy news, and I know that's not anything anybody wants to hear. And I think if you're just using browser forms with no code, no qRules in Office 365, you're going to have no problems. I think your simple basic browser form is going to have no problems. But if you have any need for any enhanced functionality whatsoever in Office 365, at this point we are not recommending qRules and browser forms in Office 365 just because of the issues we've seen. So I know that stinks, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. So other than that, The only other thing I wanted to tell you about this morning, and I'm sorry this has been so much of just a talking and no doing anything yet, but Jimmy will be here soon, and you guys will have a lab and you'll have things to do aside from just listen to somebody talk on and on. I just had information I like to make sure we get out. I would like to know, and please reply in chat, if anyone has heard of Power Apps. It's a new Microsoft product that's just coming out. So, okay, good. Yay! I get to tell you guys about something new. So, Power Apps is a new thing. They, meaning Microsoft, says it's a business application solution that enables organizations to increase productivity with employee apps that are easily created, shared, and managed. I might have spelled Sienna wrong, but I'm not sure if anybody has tried Project Sienna. It was kind of an early version of this. And the idea here is this is an Azure-backed thing that the Azure team has been responsible for. Given that, I have a feeling that means it's got a little bit of muscle behind it. It is right now an invite-only program, so I encourage you to hit the Power Apps site and request an invite so you can try it. I'm pretty sure it's Windows 8 or above because it's something you download from the Windows Store. So if you're still running Windows 7, it may not be something you can try, but do request an invite. I have requested an invite. I haven't received it yet. I kind of have been poking around on Twitter. Nobody seems to have gotten an invite yet. Just requested. Good job, Lucia. But there's content out there that they put out. There's some videos. I haven't watched them yet myself. I want to watch them. I think since it is Azure backed and Azure seems to be something that's being promoted highly and kind of bet big on, I think there's a good chance it might gain some traction and gain some wheels. I know over time we've talked about Access web apps maybe are gonna gain some traction, and we haven't seen anything there. If you go to that bottom link, the official Microsoft blog link, and this presentation is in the training site, so you can click on the links to find access, or you can just look them up. If you go to that official Microsoft blog link, you'll find one of the first comments is somebody feeling extremely aggrieved over what happened to Light Switch. So I don't know if anybody ever tried Light Switch. Apparently it's not officially dead yet. It gained some traction. It was a little more devy. It was a little less something you just pick up and mess with, but it has lost all of its Microsoft support, apparently. It was a big deal. It had a lot of promoters within the company, and then over time it seemed like it's become a little wasteland. So the first comment you'll see on that official Microsoft blog is somebody who's or it was one of the first comments when I looked recently. It was somebody really upset about what happened to Light Switch. At any rate, they say it works on all devices, create and share apps from phones, tablets, or desktops. They work instantly across every OS. And I really, looking at this screenshot, look at the screenshot of the desktop, right? See the little teensy tiny, I'm really hoping that's like the design view or something. The share over in the right-hand task pane makes me think that hopefully that's the design view, because if this is the desktop experience, then even if it works on all devices, it doesn't look good on all devices. So I'm not sure what's going to come of it, but I think it's definitely worth investigating. I think Jimmy is going to be with us soon. Christopher, did you have a chance to try accessing the training site and see if you were able to log in? We'll just take care of a few more little administrative things while we wait for Jimmy. Okay, great. You were able to log in. So it looks like, Catherine, you are our only one who hasn't been able to. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, great. Well, and again, you guys know where to find me. You got my email address if you do have something that comes up that you're wondering about, and you should always feel free to drop me a line, and of course, you feel free to post on the forum when you need assistance. Um, Jimmy is going to be covering full trust commands. And some of these I think are a little esoteric and some of them are new, so hopefully those will be of interest. I'm going to go ahead and just pause, and this will give everybody a little 5-minute break before Jimmy starts up at 8:30. I sure appreciate everybody attending, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks so much.
The second module of our qRules training. My name is Jimmy Risch. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I was an InfoPath MVP for 5 years, and now I'm an ASP.NET MVP. So this session is about the full trust commands that are included in qRules. So a few of you may be wondering what full trust is. So here's our agenda. We're going to be talking about what full trust is, ways you can use full trust in your forms, and a few of the commands in qRules that require full trust. So first of all, what is full trust? As most of you have probably noticed by now, InfoPath forms have 3 available security levels: the restricted, domain, and full trust. Now, most forms work okay with domain level security. We don't see a lot of restricted, but sometimes full trust is required to do everything you need to do. Full trust is a setting you use when you require functionality that's a little bit higher risk than what's allowed by domain level security. So things like accessing the user's local system, such as their files, directories, and things like that. Domain level security prevents the forms from doing that, but full trust will allow you to do this. Things that are not pre-approved as safe. There's some functionality that a form could use that could be perfectly safe, but Microsoft didn't know ahead of time to mark that as safe. So things like that, and also things that access data outside of the domain where the form is published. Now that's not a completely accurate description, but generally that is the case. Now there are a few different ways you can use full trust forms. Using full trust requires a little more setup and rigmarole than using a domain trust form, but we're going to show you ways to do that during this session that shouldn't be too tough. So the first option is to create an installable form and have your form users install the form. That's what we're going to be showing during this session. Another option is to sign the form with a certificate. And the benefit of doing this is that it doesn't require everyone to manually install the form. You can just have them access it, and it opens up nicely. But the downside is that creating a certificate and maintaining it can require extra effort and so in some cases money. So we prefer the installable form option most of the time. And if you're working with browser forms in SharePoint, the way to use a full trust form is to admin deploy it. That doesn't require installing or a certificate, but it does require you to go into central admin and deploy the form there. So how do you create an installable form? Well, there really isn't much to this, and I'll demo it right now. So here is a form that I'm going to be showing a little more later in the session, but right now I want to publish it. So to create an installable form, I'm just going to go over to the File menu here, click on Publish, and I want to publish this to a network location. I need to save the form. So let me just get this path here. Nope, not that one. This one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I want to pick a place to publish the file. So this can be any arbitrary location on your file system. I'm going to publish it to qRules in the on my C drive, and I'll call this validate user.xsn. And let me make sure this is the right file. Okay, well, this will do. And this is the validate user starter form. Okay, click next. Now on this next window of the wizard, we want to make sure that this box is actually blank. So I'm going to take the value that was put there by default and blank it out. Okay, and then it's just going to show me some values here, and I'll hit publish and close. And if I come into this qRules folder here, now I have that file that's been published. So that's really all there is to it, to creating a form that can be installed. Now, since this is a full trust form, if I try to open it right now, what I'm going to see is an error. And because Microsoft has introduced a bug that messes up this dialog, I can't see the error, but this is happening because it's full trust. So how am I going to get around that? What I need to do is install the form. So I have this folder here. I need to close PowerPoint. And what we see here is that I have this form installer utility right here. So I want to drag this file onto the form installer utility, and in a moment I'll show you where you can go get this utility. And actually I'm going to hit no here because I missed a step. You need to make sure that all your InfoPath instances are closed before you carry this out. Okay, so let's try this. I'm going to click yes here, and it's going to ask me, do I want to install this form template? I'm going to hit yes, and here I get a confirmation that it was successfully installed. Okay, so now the form has been installed. I can click on this file here, and as we see, it's now opening up just fine. Okay, so back to the slide deck. We can see the steps I carried out. I clicked the file menu. I selected publish. I picked a publish to a network location, picked the location, next. I made sure that text box was blank on the screen after that. Hit next and then publish. Okay, now for installing the form, what you need to do first is get the form installer utility. Now I've prepared a URL here that you can use, tinyurl.com/form installer. That will take you to the location on our InfoPath dev site where you can download that utility. You place the exe file in a convenient location. I have put it on my desktop, which is where I would recommend putting it, but you can put it anywhere really. You put the XSN in a location where it will not be deleted or removed. That's important. The installer, the install process keeps track of where the XSN is at the time it's installed, so you need to keep it there so you can continue opening it from there. Close any running instances of InfoPath. You may have InfoPath still running in the background even if you've closed all the windows. So if the installer gives you an error when you try to install the form, you can check Task Manager to make sure that you don't have any running tasks in the background. You can then drag the XSN on top of the form installer utility. Follow the prompts. It's usually just that one security prompt and then the one asking you if you want to install it. And then you can open the form by double-clicking it, as I showed you, or by selecting it from the list of available forms when you open up InfoPath Filler. Okay. So let's talk about some of the commands in qRules that require full trust but allow you to do some pretty nifty things with your form. The first command I want to talk about is called validate user. This command allows you to verify a user's username and password against either the local machine or the domain the machine is joined to. So the idea here is that you want to verify that a form's user is who they say they are, or that they are a particular user. So you'll have them type their username and password into a couple text boxes. You'll typically want to have the second text box, the password text box, obscure the password in some way, either by making the color same as the background or by using some sort of wacky font. Now this is useful for approval workflows, for restricting users from certain areas of the form and things like that. And this is particularly relevant when the person using the form might not actually be the person logged into the machine. So let's see how that works. So here's my form, and this time I actually want to open up the validate user final form. Okay, so this is just a pretty bare bones demo form, but what we can see here is that we have a section here where the user can enter their username and password and click approve, and if their username is validated, we show this approval section down below to indicate that the form has been approved. So let's have a look at that, how that works. So I'm going to enter my username, and first I'll enter in an invalid password, just a couple of random characters, and I hit approve. So this runs the validate user command, and I can see that it's detected that the username and password were not valid together, and it's telling me that they were invalid. I'll type another invalid password, and again, no luck. And this time I will type my correct password, hit approve, and we can see that it has been validated. So that's a pretty nifty command. It's very easy to use. We're providing a lab along with this training session where you'll have the opportunity to set up the command yourself. But basically all you do is use the validate user command, pass it the username and password that you want to validate, and it will place the result in the result field of qRules data source as either true if the username and password are valid, or false if they were not valid. So I recommend trying out that lab when you get a chance. And there's just to go into some of the details here. What I'm doing here when they click the approve button is I'm running that command and then copying the result into a validated field. For this, I've set up a secondary data source that just has a few fields for the user validation: a username, a password, a field to store a copy of the password, which I'll explain in a moment, and then a validated field. So it's good to have these in a secondary data source, because this way you ensure that nobody's username and password are actually getting stored with the form XML. So I definitely recommend that. You can use the XML file from this form. It should be applicable for most cases. So yeah, I'm running the command and copying the value into here. And if that value is true, what I'm doing is I'm copying the username value into an approver field in the main data source, and then setting this approved field to true. And that's what causes this section to hide and this section to show. And this here is a calculated value box that includes that my approver field. So that's how all that works. Now, the reason I'm copying the password, it's just an extra bit of security, but the reason for this is that, say if I disabled this rule, and let's preview the form. Just going to type some A's here. So I hit approve, and for some reason, oh, okay. So the validation is not working because I disabled that rule. But let's say I wanted to tab back to this field. What we can see here is that this value is now highlighted, and the value that I typed in here is visible to anyone looking at my screen. Even though the text is set to the same color as the background, when it's highlighted, the text becomes visible. So what I'm doing here is when the user tabs out of the password field, I actually copy its value into a field that's not visible on the form, and then reset its value to blank. And then I use this password copy field in the actual validation. So that's just an extra step to help prevent people from finding out your password. Okay. Now, there are ways to validate users without using full trust or qRules. We provide an electronic signature XTP, which is something you set up on SharePoint and basically allows people to store a PIN number ahead of time and use that to indicate that they are indeed the person they say they are. We've also recently come up with neat techniques for using hashed PIN numbers, which is a little different from the hashed pins that we use. Sorry, it's a little different from what happens in the electronic signature XTP, and we actually demoed this technique on our webinar on September 9th. Now, I have a question coming in asking whether this electronic signature XCP works on Office 365. Yes, I believe it does. It requires setting permissions in a list that stores the signatures, but that is something that should work on 365. I can't say that with 100% certainty, but if you try it out and it doesn't work, we can certainly give you a refund. Okay. Now, another common use of full trust functionality is working with the local file system. We have 5 commands in qRules that work with the local file system. There may be more. Save to path is a useful command that allows saving XMLs to a local folder. This is a request we've come across a few times where people wanted to use a local folder or a network share as the location where they store their XMLs. It's primarily intended for saving the form's main XML to a local path, but you can also use it to save the contents of a secondary data source as well. Create directory is a command that creates a local folder on your file system. You can use this in conjunction with save to path to store files wherever you want them. And delete file, as the name implies, allows you also to delete files, and that's not just XML files, but any file if you wanted to, assuming the user had permission to do that. Get file is an interesting command. It allows you to load a local file into your form. It loads it as a base64 string. And then you can use other qRules commands to decode that base64 string into whatever you want to use it for. Could be an image, could be some XML, could be some plain text. And list directory allows you to view the contents of a directory. So with all these commands together, you get pretty wide array of functionality for working with the local file system and working with files. So let's just step over to our demo here. Save file example. We'll be including this file with the course materials. So I'm just going to preview this form. I'll show you what it looks like before we dig into some of the details. So I have a folder text box here. Just ask me where I want to create a folder and then save some files. So I've prepared this qRules directory ahead of time. And as we can see here, it currently just has this one file in it. So I'm going to create a subfolder under that called demo folder. And I want to use the file name myfile. All right, so first I'll click Create Folder. And what we see here is that this button has run a command called Create Directory. It specified the path. It's just using this value that I put in the text box up here. I can create another folder if I like, and that's been created as well. And if we look over here in Windows Explorer, we can now see that I have these two empty folders. Now let's try saving the file. So I'll click Save File. And what this is doing is it's using the save to path command. And this path here is just this first value, the folder location, combined with the file name I specified. And if we look here in the demo folder 2 folder, we can see my file there. And I've saved out the main data source from the form, so we can see that it has those two values I've entered. So when we're saving XML, we typically want to have an XML extension on the end, so I'll put that there. And with that, now I've got an XML file. And now that I've got my XML file, let's just, yep, there's the contents of the file. Now that I've got my XML file, I'd like to delete the original one I created, so I'm just going to delete that extension. Click Delete File, and the file is gone. Okay. So just to show you how this is all hooked up, it's very simple. Look at our rules here. So on this folder button, I'm just using the command create directory. Okay, I've got a question coming in which I'll answer in just a moment. I'm calling the command create directory, and I'm just concatenating in the value of that directory field. For a save file, I'm using the save to path command. I'm specifying the overwrite equals true option, which in the situation where I was making multiple changes to the file, I could overwrite the file. If that's not specified, I'll get an error if I try to save to a file that's already there. And for the path, I'm just concatenating in the value of the directory field, a backslash, and then the file name. And the delete file button is very similar. We can see I'm using the delete file command. I'm specifying path, the directory, and the file name. Okay, so we had a question come in, which is, I believe, as I understood the question, can the create directory command create multiple subfolders or multiple levels of subfolders? And the answer is yes. So so let's just have several subfolders here. So this should create a deep series of folders, and I'll click Create Folder, and it says that that succeeded. So I'll come over here, and we see I have folder 1. Inside that is folder 2, folder 3, folder 4, and that's it. And then I can save a file in there, and there we have it. So yes, so it's very easy to use commands, makes it very nice and easy to manage your files and folders. Typically, you wouldn't have a create directory command on a button by itself. Often it would be used in combination with files. If you're planning to save files to a particular directory, you could have a series of rules. You could have a series of rules that first created the directory and then saved the file. So let's just have a look at that. So I'm just going to copy this rule over here. Okay, move that up. Preview again. Put this in demo folder 3. Call this myfile.xml. Just double check that we don't have a demo folder 3 yet, and indeed we don't. Click this, and there in one shot we both created the folder and put the file into it. Now I got a question here that says, if we just use save to path, is there a way to change the drive? I don't really understand what that question means. So if you could clarify that, I will answer it for you. For now, I'll go back to presentation. So the last command I want to talk about is called a make request. Now this is a command that we added very recently to qRules. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to make HTTP requests, which is web requests, with arbitrary content. Now InfoPath is great for doing web requests with XML. It's designed for querying SOAP web services. In InfoPath 2010, there was new functionality for querying data from REST services using a GET command. But all of those had to be basically XML-based web services. What this allows you to do is use web services that can have any sort of content. And in recent years, a lot of web services are now starting to use a data format called JSON. So this will allow you to do that. Not just to query data, but also to submit data and things like that. Along with the make request command, we've added two other commands which do not require full trust by themselves. These are called XML to JSON and JSON to XML. And what these commands allow you to do is convert some XML in your form into a JSON structure. And then if the web service produces a response in JSON, you can convert it back to XML and put it into your form using the JSON to XML command. I actually demoed this in a previous webinar, or it may not have been me demoing it, but we did show it in a webinar called qRules 7.2 release announcement. That was earlier this year, and I recommend going and checking out that webinar to see what these commands are all about. And we've also provided more detailed information about how to use these commands in the qRules documentation. So this is great for doing things like submitting tickets to Zendesk. I know that PayPal now uses JSON-based web services. So certainly a lot of cool stuff you can do with these commands. So to get back to the previous question about if there's a way to change the drive. Now, the only reason it says C here is that I have put the default value of C into this field here. If I had multiple drives, which I don't, I could certainly use a different drive. So I could use a D drive here. Since I don't have a D drive, it's just going to say, give me an error. The device is not ready. This means that there is no D drive. But certainly you can do that using your form logic. You wouldn't typically have a user manually entering in a directory. That would usually be part of the form's logic. So certainly you can use any drive you want. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we have a lab which shows you how to set up the validate user functionality as I demoed earlier in this presentation. We've got a validate user starter form right here. And what this basically is the same as the form I showed earlier, except it does not have any rules on the approve button, and it doesn't have any of the conditional hiding on the section controls. And we've got a document here that sort of goes through and explains how to add those rules and set up that formatting. So we're going to be distributing this as part of the course materials, so definitely give this a try when you get a chance. So we're a bit early, but that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to talk about in terms of full trust commands. Just to review, full trust commands, they require a bit of extra work to set up the form. You have to install it or use the certificate. But once you get past that, they will allow you to use even more functionality than you would ordinarily be able to. Validate user allows checking users' actual passwords. You have various commands available for working with local files and directories. The make request command allows you to work with JSON web services and other web services. And I believe there are a few other commands in qRules that require full trust, so definitely go through the qRules command overview and see what we have to offer and try it out. Now, if anyone has any questions, I can take questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching.